Welcome to the first webinar hosted by the Armenian Museum of America. We're excited to offer this multimedia program with collector and researcher Harout Arakelian, and I'm Jason Sohigian, Executive Director of the museum. Many of us grew up with the music we're talking about tonight, or music by the people who inherited this legacy. The more I heard about Harout's research and his live events at Abril Books, the more I wanted him to come back to the East Coast to share these songs and the stories that go along with them. Fast forward today, though this program was started long before I joined the museum in November. This event is tied to the launch of our Sound Archive, a monthly series that's based on the digitization, restoration, and storytelling around the museum's collection of several thousand records. The series made its debut in March on our social media pages and on our website under the Virtual Resources tab. It's coming at an opportune time when there's been a revival of Armenian culture and activism in recent years, and a renewed interest in vinyl recordings. Last year, the museum turned to virtual offerings so people can remain connected while we were closed during the pandemic. We offer a series of programs now, including a bi-monthly online concert, a monthly virtual exhibition, weekly videos about items in our collection with our curator, and now the Sound Archive. Before starting, I wanted to offer a few acknowledgments and thank yous on behalf of our Board of Trustees and our President, Michelle Collegian. First, to Jesse Collins, who began digitizing our collection 2 years ago, and to Zoe Quinn, our collections manager and manager of museum operations, for overseeing this monumental task, and to our friend Harout Arakelian for uncovering the stories behind the music, and to Project Save Armenian Photograph Archives and the Haidanic Archives for providing the historic images that accompany this material on our website. And finally, to the many donors to our archives who collected and cared for these resources and entrusted them with the museum to be preserved and shared. Just a few housekeeping items. We'll do our best to make a recording of this event available after today, and Zoe will moderate a few questions after Harout's presentation. So please post your questions in the comments tab near the bottom of your screen. Like all organizations, the museum is planning to reopen again in the coming months, so stay tuned via our website and our Facebook and Instagram pages. With all that's happened in recent months in Artsakh, and as we come upon the remembrance of the genocide in April, we've all come to realize that our mission is more important now than ever. So now I'd like to turn it over to Harout for his presentation.
Thank you, Jason. I'd like to begin by thanking the Armenian Museum of America for providing me with this opportunity. I'd like to thank Jason Sohikian, Zoe Quinn, and the entire museum team, and a special thank you to Gary Lynn Sinanyan. Many of the images you'll see tonight are courtesy of Project Save, and I'd like to thank Ruth Tomasian, Solin Sadian, and their whole team, and especially Susan Adams. Many of the Armenian language newspaper items are courtesy of the Haidanic Digital Archive and the National Library of Armenia. The audio selections tonight were transferred and digitized, cleaned and restored by volunteer Jesse Knas Collins. Thank you for all your hard work. Most of all, I'd like to thank all of you for joining us today. So who am I? My name is Harout Arakelian, and I'm a collector. I like to use the word Armenobilia, but is that even a word? I'm a music collector. My collecting efforts revolve around the Armenian contribution to the landscape of American music and culture in the first half of the 20th century as captured on these dusty, fragile discs called 78s. They look like these. In other words, I collect records which were recorded and produced in America between the early 1900s and the late 1950s. And during this time, over 1,000 records were produced by Armenians in America. And throughout the country, they contributed and left us these beautiful musical sources of information for us to explore a century later. Though I'm limited on the amount of music I can share tonight, the Armenian Museum of America has just unveiled the Sound Archive. And over time, a great deal of sound recordings will be made available to the public, and there's a remarkable amount of music in the archive and a remarkable variety of styles and genres worthy of exploring. I hope the selections of the night will highlight a dynamic era in the musical culture of Armenians. These musicians, these records, played a vital role in preserving culture, and I hope together we can continue to nurture and preserve and revitalize these recordings. The Armenian involvement in the recording arts starts very early. There's even a hint of an Edison wax cylinder recorded by Cherimian Heidig sending his well wishes to the community in Worcester in 1891 because they just unveiled or opened the first Armenian church in North America. These discs represent the earliest known Armenian musical recordings, beginning in Tiflis in 1902. Now there's believed to be a few more recordings as early as 1898, and there were numerous recordings in multiple places throughout those first or early years, and it would take America a few years to catch up. In America, the record stores and the distributors and the dealers played an important role. And here's a few examples of the earliest Armenian-owned music stores in America. Nishkyan's probably being the first. In 1898, Kalim Hagop Nishkyan opened a small bicycle shop, Nishkyan Cyclery. He would also sell phonographs, the machines and the record players, and the discs out of the bicycle shop, until a few years later when he would convert it and turn it into the Nishkyan Phonograph Store. Both endeavors, the bike shop and the music store, were very successful, but his untimely death in 1925 left the business to his wife and daughter Naoma, and together they ran it successfully for another 10 years and sold it in 1935. I should ask, Nishkyans were some of the earliest to settle in the Fresno, Central Valley of California area. But here's this one company that pops up, very briefly, the PJ Epekjian American Armenian Phonograph Company. The advertisement is dated to August 24th, 1909, and in bold letters it reads, Haigagan Record Net, or Armenian Records. It has listed for sale what we believe to be the first Armenian language recordings from the United States. Oddly, the advert doesn't tell us anything about the recordings, really. Not which label they're on, nor whom they're by. But what we do know is that earlier in that year, in 1909, 29-year-old electrotyper Mardiros Der Sarkis Tashjian, a non-professional vocalist, entered the recording studios of the Columbia Phonograph Company and documented the Armenian language for the first time in the United States. It may be difficult to see from your vantage point, but the disc image has written on it, music on both sides. This was still very early in the phonograph industry. Prior to this revolution of putting music on both sides of a disc, music was just released on one side of a disc. So you'd get one song per disc, and this invention gave us 2 songs per disc. And it was introduced in 1907 or 8, and it was a success. Soon it became a standard. Mardiros's recordings were coupled with non-Armenian songs. The executives at Columbia Records had 2 ideas that proved to be very successful, possibly saving the company. One was the idea of the double-sided disc. The second was the E-Series. In 1908, Columbia introduced their foreign or ethnic series of music. And the E-Series ran from 1908 until 1923. All the songs of the evening's program are from Columbia's E-Series, except for the 2 songs by Victor Records. Let's listen to a recording from 1909 before continuing our program. I also want to state that while we are confident that these 6 songs are the first recordings in the Armenian language in the United States, there's a slight chance that there were earlier recordings, and I'd be thrilled if those discs surfaced. The name of the tune that I'm going to play is Hayrenikut Mortsir, Forget Your Fatherland. Unfortunately, the first verse was too difficult to properly translate. We were able to catch some of the words, but not the whole sentence structure. So we've left it off the translation, but allow me to convey the energy of the song. Our singer relays what he is being told. Hayrenikut Mortsir Gesen Odarner. Forget your homeland, the foreigners say. But the hero of the song rejects such notions and emphatically expresses, Yes Gesirem Hayastan, Abri Hokis Gilikya. I still love Armenia. Long live my dear Gilikya. So let's listen to Mardiros Der Sarkis Tashjian, recorded 1909 for Columbia Records in New York City, Hayrenikut Mortsir. That was Mardiros Der Sarkis Tashjian. These 6 recordings weren't the end of Mardiros' musical career. The following year, Mardiros would return with his brothers Nishan and Levon and record an additional 28 songs, an amazing number. For today's program, the second half will feature different artists, but Mardiros is a star of our story. He was born Mardiros Der Sarkis Tashjian in Kharpet, Western Armenia in 1880. His last name had the honorific of dead, which signifies his father was a priest. And in this case, the priest and the patriarch of the family was Sarkis Tashjian, who was born in Kharpet in February of 1835. Sarkis would marry Shushan, born Kharpet 1847. Their first child, a daughter named Elmas, born 1875. Mardiros, born 1880, Nishan follows in 1881, Levon in 1886, and finally the youngest of the family, Takui, born in 1888, and all the children were born in Kharpet. But let's go back to the Epikjan advertisement. Elmas, the oldest child, married Charles Garabed Epikjan, so it seems PJ was in-laws or Khunamis with the Tashjians. Mardiros arrived in America in 1892 at the age of 12. By this year, there were less than 2,000 Armenians in all of the United States. It's that year, January 1st, 1892, Ellis Island was opened as an immigration station, and there would be a steady increase in the numbers of Armenians coming to America, at least for a few decades. Mardiros lived in Massachusetts for 5 years, and at the age of 17 in 1897, he began working for the Empire City Electrotype Company in New York City. Starts as an errand boy and quickly moves up all the way up to vice president. The business was established in 1890 by pioneering New York businessman John Garabed Hermuz, who was born in Constantinople in 1862 and arrived in the United States pretty early in 1880. Mardiros, as he was progressing in the New York business world, he did not forget the land he was born on. On July 27, 1901, the New York-based Armenian-language daily Tsayin Haydanyansk published a notice which listed Mardiros as a secretary of a newly formed community organization known as the New York Kharpetsi Union, or Kharpet Compatriots Union. He would become an American citizen on May 5, 1902. While Mardiros was enjoying his American life, his brothers were growing up in Western Armenia. Before I introduce his brothers, Levon and Nishan Der Sarkis Tashjian, let's jump our timeline a little bit and listen to a tune by the Tashjian Brothers. Here on the screen is their complete discography of their 1910 recordings. a total of 28 songs recorded in 1910 for Columbia Records. Now, all three are non-professional and untrained musicians, but I believe their sincerity makes up for it. Now let's listen to what they titled I Pur Zeinet, which is also titled Yech Beidenkmenk. Again, recorded 1910, Columbia Records, New York City, the Tashjian Brothers. Nishan was the middle brother. Born in 1881, in 1901 he graduated from the Sanasadian College in Garin. Levon would graduate from the Central School of Mezari, where Nishan was an instructor. An incident in 1903 in Khodpert, of which the brothers were involved in, may have been the cause for the family to flee their ancestral homeland. After nearly 2 decades apart, in 1904 the Tosh John family is reunited. Mardiros would marry Manushak Barsamyan and have 2 boys, Harry and George. Der Sarkis would continue to serve as a priest in the Armenian church and community. Nishan and Levon would become citizens and enroll in Harvard Medical School. Nishan would also marry Elmas Garabedyan and begin his lifelong involvement with the Haidanic Association. April 1909. Armenians in America received the news of the massacres in Adana. Both the English and the Armenian language papers covered the atrocities and the relief efforts that soon followed. This first newspaper item is titled Armenian Protest, includes speeches given by Nishan and Der Sarkis. Could the purpose of the music recorded by the Tashjians have been produced at least in part to raise funds for the relief efforts needed after the Adana massacres? Returning to the discography of the Tashjian Brothers, again, 28 songs in total is a really impressive number. And the songs the Tashjians recorded can be considered patriotic songs, consisting of odes to freedom fighters. For example, the very first disc has on one side the ARF Kailek, or March, coupled with the song on the other side being the Hunchak March. They also have homages to land, such as Ach Vospuragan, the Lament of Vospuragan, Yetvot Potsvin, commonly known as Gilikya. Each tune consists of the brothers vocal harmonizing as a three-person choir, as we heard with the first tune. Let's listen to their ode to the ARF, the song titled Tashnak Suchan Hump. Though it's specific to the ARF, let's allow it to represent all those that fought for self-determination and preservation of culture. The recording is from 1910, New York City, the Tashjian Brothers. (1915 to 1917) would be especially grueling for the Tashjian family. Just as reports were coming in that a genocide was being committed in the Ottoman Empire, on May 19, 1915, the patriarch of the family, Der Sarkis Tashjian, died at the age of 80 in Boston. 2 years later, the matriarch of the family, Shushan Tashjian, would pass away on June 21, 1917. Also in 1917, Mardiros lost his mentor and business partner, John Hermuz. All these events would lead to Mardiros packing all his belongings and moving his family across the country. The family bought 80 acres of land on the southeast edge of Cutler, a city in the Central Valley of California, about 20 miles away from Fresno. More significantly, the land bordered on the Armenian town Yetem. Yetem, meaning the Garden of Eden, was established in 1901 when the Armenian residents petitioned for the name change. So Mardiros Der Sarkis Tashjian left New York City in electrotype industry to become a farmer specializing in dried fruits, and he would also be involved with the California Peach and Fig Growers Association. The Tashjians would welcome a daughter on April 11, 1921, Evelyn Tashjian. She would be the only member of the family to pursue a career in music and entertainment. And in a way, she got her start at the age of 5 when she started singing at the church in Yetem. Evelyn would have brushes with fame on a number of occasions. At the age of 18, she would join a Dorsey band headed by Tommy Dorsey. Her time with that band happened to coincide with a young singer named Frank Sinatra. Later, she was offered the role of the Champagne Lady on a television program, The Lawrence Welk Show, but she turned it down due to her father's failing health. And she's also credited with backup vocals for a number of Hollywood major productions. As for Mardiros' 2 other children, the 2 boys, the eldest son, Harry, would become the first public defender in Tulare County and a very highly respected trial attorney. Unfortunately, he died at a young age, at 36, of a sudden heart attack in 1942. Due to his brother's death, George returned home from the army to be with the family, and he would spend his life on a family farm. By the early 1950s, Mardiros was suffering from health issues and was living with Evelyn in Los Angeles. Manushag, his wife, had just passed away in 1944. And on November 25, 1953, first Armenian recording artist in the United States, Mardiros Der Sarkis Tashjian, died. Both Manushag and Mardiros had their funeral services held at their church in Yetem, and their final resting place or plot is at the Ararat Cemetery in Fresno. Levon, the youngest of the brothers, the former record distributor, followed in Nishan's footsteps by becoming a dentist, and he followed Mardiros out to California. In 1926, he patented a cabinet for toothbrushes, something that we take for granted these days. The toothbrush holder. See, he started to manufacture the cabinet for toothbrushes, and there was a local campaign to name the product, as the factory he built was in Fresno. So the top prize was $20. I haven't been able to track down what the product was finally named, nor who won that $20. Unfortunately, while in San Francisco, Levon Der Sarkis Tashjian fell ill, and in 1929 died at the Mare Island Naval Hospital at the young age of 42. In regards to Armenian historical, political, social affairs, Nishan was the most involved of the 3 brothers. He joined the Armenian Revolutionary Federation in 1901. In 1903, he's assisting Hagop and Hopet Hinchak fighters in Kharpet. By 1909, he's published his first book, The Question of Unity and Solidarity Between Armenian Revolutionary Parties. And the lower image is with President Wilson from 1916. For decades, Nishan served as a president of the Haidanic Association, while being the chairman of the ARF in America, while also running his dental office. And I wanted to highlight a certain episode which is briefly mentioned in the article on the museum's website. See, the research into the Tashjians is ongoing and fun. So in 1919, Nishan attended the Paris Peace Conference as a special correspondent for the Haidanic Press, and as well as one of the 4 Armenian-American delegates. Upon his return to America, Nishan delivers a series of lectures and public talks with Shahan Natalie. So part of the story of Nishan Der Sarkis Tashjian that we've yet to really unravel is his involvement with what is known as Operation Nemesis. I believe he was involved, and this other marker is quite interesting. Torcom Bezazian used Nishan as a point of contact for his return to America after his trial in Germany for the assassination of a perpetrator of the Armenian Genocide. Nishan Der Sarkis Tashjian published numerous books and published many articles for the Haidanic Press, and I can define him by a term, a community servant. On Wednesday, January 24th, 1945, Nishan Der Sarkis Tashjian died of a heart attack. Before continuing with the program, let's listen to one more song by the Tashjian Brothers. This one is called Himaya Lirenk, Shall We Now Remain Silent? And these Tashjian recordings are currently available on the museum's website if anybody wants to check them out there. And all the restoration work that we've been listening to is done by Jesse Knoss-Collins. So let's hear some more Tashjians. Again, Himaya Lirenk, Shall We Now Remain Silent, recorded 1910, New York City for Columbia Records. That concludes the biographies of the Tashjian Brothers. 1911 saw the conclusion of their recording careers, but not their involvement with music. We see from these advertisements the brothers continued to distribute records. Mardiros' ad is from 1912. What were they selling, though? That's always the question. So if we go back to the 1910 Haidanic edition with the Tashjian ad, if we pull back and see the full ad, we see this other one by record dealer Mugurdich George Parsegyan, who was also a musician. M.G. Parsegyan began to advertise himself as a record dealer as early as 1907, if not earlier. Mugurdich George Parsegyan was born in 1882 in Dikranagert and arrived in the United States in 1898. He lived in both New York and New Jersey. And in 1912, M.G. Parsegyan is given credit for organizing recording sessions that featured Armenian and Assyrian Armenian musicians. Produced were at least 20 Turkish language songs, 1 Kurdish language song, and 2 Armenian songs. The voice on most of these records was that of Karekin Proodian, who was also a kanun player. Karekin Proodian was born in Dikranagert in 1884, arriving in America on May 18, 1903 with $8 in his pocket. He initially works as a weaver, but soon finds lifetime work in the photo engraving industry. Becoming a citizen of the U.S. in 1910, and soon after that, he goes back to Dikranagert to marry Anahid, or Annie. Annie and Karekin return to America on June 5, 1912. And within a few months of that return, The following song that we're going to listen to was recorded. Before we listen to the song, I want to talk about 1923 as it's a very important year in Armenian American music history. Beginning in 1923, we see a rise in private or independent record labels. Here we have M.G. Parseghian, who becomes record label owner, and the first recording on his new label featured the voice of Karekin Proodian, singing a song written by Hovsep Shamalyan. Now, Proodian's musical contributions were prolific, recording from the early 1910s throughout the 20s, and he was probably one of the most important voices of his era. I hope you agree his voice stands a test of time. Let's now listen to Ov Tzitsednak by Karekin Proodian, and he's most likely accompanied on the violin by M.G. Parseghian, recorded for the Columbia Records label, 1912, New York City. It's Karekin Proodian with Ov Tzitsednak. So then it happened. An act of evil, an act against humanity. April 1915. The Armenian Genocide. What the Armenian American community was able to do was mobilize and lead a humanitarian relief effort. Fundraisers were held throughout the country, and musicians emerged to do their part. Immediately, a series of benefit concerts were held, and soon after, numerous recording sessions were conducted. But who was selling these records? We see the Tashjian Brothers appear again, as record dealers and distributors. Again, the numbering system of their advertisement is a bit elusive, but we have the images and names of Armenag Shah-Mouradian and Zabel Panosyan. The voice we'll feature first is that of Armenag Shah-Mouradian. And this brief introduction is unfair to the life and career Armenag had, or Proodian had for that matter, but I do hope that in the future we can continue to explore these creators of culture. An interesting connection to Nishant Der Sarkis Tashjian. When Nishan was in his final year of school in Garin, Armenag Shah-Mouradian was invited to be the music director at the Huripsime Girls' School in Garin. Armenag would also perform at the Armenian church and hold many concerts as well. And this is still 1901, and according to Shah-Mouradian, he introduced or first performed the Yegmalian Badarak while in Garin. Did Nishan attend these performances? I would almost expect that he would. For his recording career in Istanbul, Armenag Shah-Mouradian would record 22 songs for the Blumenthal Orpheon label in 1914. Gomidas Vartabed would accompany him on 20 of those 22 songs. In the United States, Armenag would record at least 18 songs in the 1910s, and later in the 1920s he would establish his own label and release 2 discs and sell them from his Lawrence, Massachusetts address. Tonight I want to share a selection from the 1918 recording session. The song is Giligya, also known as Yepvot Potsvil. Like Proodian's Ovtizednog, this song was also performed by the Tashjians, and like all the songs we've listened to and are going to listen to, it's been restored by Jesse Knaus Collins. So now let us listen to a recording from May 1918, Giligya, on the Columbia Records by Armenag Shah-Mouradian. That was the voice of Armenag Shah-Mouradian. Of all the voices we're hearing tonight, our next guest, Zabel Panosyan, probably has the most information out there on her on the internet in this digital age. Like her biography, Zabel Panosyan's masterpiece Gurung is available on the internet, remastered and restored by Ian Nagoski. So instead, I'd like to play her rendition of Komidas Vartabed's Garune and share a fascinating experience in Zabel's life. Starting in late 1919, Zabel traveled through Europe and the Middle East, and when she was in Paris in 1920, she visited Komidas Vartabed. She relayed the story of her meeting to the editors of the Nevart Dzeron publication. During their meeting, Zabel asked Komidas about her handling of his compositions. She asked him whether it was possible to sing his transcribed songs solo when they were composed for a chorus. "Madam," said Komidas, "when you are familiar with the song, you understand its words and spirit, sing freely however you like." Zabel, she sang freely. Let's now listen to the voice of Zabel Panosyan and her rendition of Komidas Vartabed's Garune. It is Spring. Not recorded by the Tashjian Brothers, but restored by Jesse. Garun by Zabel Panosyan, Columbia Records, recorded March 1917. That was the voice of Zabel Panosyan. Our next guest is quite a colorful figure. The opera and vaudeville baritone and sometimes tenor Torcom Bezazian. Torcom Bezazian was born in Constantinople in 1889, and he arrives in the United States in 1913, becoming a citizen later in 1918. Torcom Bezazian was unarguably the most prolific Armenian recording artist of his era, having recorded over 100 songs for Columbia, Edison, and Victor, as well as a few discs for the Armenian-owned Sohag label. He would sing in Armenian, French, and English. Bezazian was in such high demand that in 1917, Victor Records paid Columbia $600 for his services. He also provided vocal solos for early special interest educational films. He was in a decade-long romantic relationship with trumpeter Edna White, their romance beginning in the early 1910s, and together they formed the vaudeville act known as Bezazian and White. Later in life, Edna would publish a memoir, and in it she tells a very funny story involving a camel, and that's where she gets the title of her book, The Night the Camel Sang. Together they had great success over the years. Even throughout the 20s, they recorded for the Edison label. Edna White even arranged a few of Torcom Bezazian's earlier Armenian tunes, like Titevunei, recorded in 1916. But for today, we're going to listen to a different disc, and this one was recorded September 26, 1916. Title of it is Pamporodan, on the Victor record label. One note regarding the tune. It was recorded many times, especially in this early decade, but it seems every time it had a different title or slightly misspelled. Pomp, Pom, Pam, very different spellings. I believe the accurate title of the song is Pamporodan. Boom, the Thundering March. Let's now listen to the voice of Torcom Bezazian.
Lasser höjden jazz, Tashjian tanor, och I kajgazas, håll på kynivor. Lasser höjden jazz, Tashjian tanor, och I kajgazas, håll på kynivor. Folkjärkna vorin, sagin, äggalåt, och folkjärkna vorin, parasjärkna hår. Abonar jalas magog, abonar jalas magog. Arena brejskut haigasung. Abonisen kontakon, herjali balkon titon. Abonisen kontakon, herjali balkon titon. Ideni brej, olantaraj. Ideni brej, mitachmiaj, olantaraj, mitachmiaj, olantaraj, haraj, haraj. Abon, haraj. Migonian, Sabarneta pros haer kokdalidas. I jagadut ityshnamia tavochida turaskal. I jagadut ityshnamia tavochida turaskal. Es jag höran sjojk vehin vahana. Drejskanche arjan garmir vakana. Es jag höran sjojk vehin vahana. Drejskanche arjan garmir vakana. French yal osashun tapri karshavar razmamus barki hanu jeribar. Abon ariyalas magog, abon ariyalas magog. Arena brejskut haigasung. Abonisen kontakon, herjali balkon titon. Abonisen kontakon, herjali balkon titon. Ideni brej, olantaraj. Ideni brej, mitachmiaj, olantaraj, mitachmiaj, olantaraj, haraj, haraj. Abon, haraj.
For our next song, we'll stay with the Victor record label, and we'll hear from a woman born in Perchanj, which is near Kharpet. She was also raised in Chicago, Nevart Dzeron Koshkarian. So the Dzeron family left Perchanj, a village near Kharpet, in 1889 when an order was announced to remove all Armenians from the engineering ranks. Manuk Dzirun, Nevart's father, was studying engineering. To continue his education, he settled the family first in Worcester, Massachusetts, and then resettling in Chicago, Illinois. Nevart, born in Perchanj, arrived in America in 1893. She was born there in 1889. And after growing up in Chicago, attending school and all of that, she would attend the Chicago Art Institute and form an Armenian song and dance ensemble. Here's a photo of the dance ensemble. The man, her dancer, Haik Shakirjan, not to be confused with his cousin, Brigadier General Haik Shakirjan. This fellow is Haik Rupen Shakirjan, a violinist who would go on to be known as a well-respected lecturer at the Art Institute of Chicago. Now, during the relief efforts, Dzeron Koshkarian would travel across the country giving lectures, and it was always accompanied by song and dance. Nevart would marry Bedros Koshkarian, an engineering professor, and they would settle in New Jersey, but I thought this little bit of Americana was quite interesting. Here we have baseball legend Babe Ruth giving Nevart the bat he used to hit his 22nd home run of the 1920 season. The bat was used, they would auction it off and use the funds for the Near East relief efforts. 100 years later, it seems America's athletes are very supportive of Armenian issues. Let's now listen to another composition by Gomidas Vartabed, Gurung, performed by Nevart Dzeron Koshkarian on the Victor Records label, recorded in 1920. Nevart Dzeron Koshkarian. I'd like to thank all of you for your patience, and I thank you for listening to the random ramblings of a record collector. I hope these selections have been interesting and entertaining to each of you. What wasn't represented in today's set of songs was a dynamic spectrum of genres and styles of Armenian music recorded in America. And there's a great deal more to explore, and I hope as a community we can revitalize this aspect of Armenian American history. The Armenian Museum of America's Sound Archive is helping us make that possible. So please continue supporting the museum and Project SAVE as well. I'd like to present once more Mardiros Der Sarkis Tashjian's 1909 recording of Hayrenik Mortsid, and a reflection on when he recorded this. Yes, his family essentially fled their homeland. And yes, earlier that year, 1909, the Adana massacres occurred. But the idea of returning was not far-fetched. In 1909, Mardiros probably never imagined how much was going to be lost in the following few years. A return to Kharpet was not going to happen. Also, here he is, a young man in New York City, and while those around him are telling him, forget that land, go down to Broadway, man, there's the bright lights of Broadway, catch a musical down there. But Mardiros, he grew up on that land, he played with that soil, his childhood memories are of the golden plains of Kharpet. Mardiros left Kharpet when he was 12 years old, in 1892. Never did he expect never to see his Hayrenik again. But he did what he could in retaining his culture, his identity. He even resettled in Yetem, the Eden of California's Central Valley. And I'm thankful to him. I'm thankful to Mardiros and his brothers Nishan and Levon Der Sarkis Tashjian for entering the recording booth of Columbia Records in 1909 and 1910 to document this beautiful musical language for the first time in the United States. And I don't want to sound like a broken record, but starting with the Tashjians and continuing over the decades, these musicians were creators of culture, and it's exciting and inspiring to explore the music they documented for us and to explore the lives they led and the communities they helped build. Thank you all for your patience, and here's a closing song for the evening, Hayrenik Mortsid, or Forget Your Fatherland. And the vocalist is Mardiros Der Sarkis Tashjian, recorded 1909 for Columbia Records in New York City.
Keskandirem hayastan abi o gizgelik ya Heyeva bolamayı Allah'a gir saydesi Keskandirem hayastan abi o gizgelik ya.
Alrighty, so Harout, everybody, if you have questions, we have time for just a few questions. I do have 3 for you proactive people who were asking questions during the session here. So the first question, Harout, is from Raj, and he asks, and I know you've mentioned that Jesse did most of this work here that we're about to ask this question of, but how are the recordings technically cleaned and or remastered or enhanced?
I wonder if Jesse is available to answer that because he's working so directly with them. But basically the process, and maybe he can correct us on this. First, there's a physical process of actually physically cleaning the records, being it with a little bit of soap. I know Jesse has a few solutions that he's using that really get the grime and the dirt out of it. And then he does a really high quality straight transfer. I'm not sure of the exact technical specs that he's using. And from that, he takes a raw recording and goes through the process, the meticulous process of cleaning out big imperfections like clicks and things like that. And basically removing as much of the surface noise and the junk that's accumulated on these records after about 100 years. So they'll never be perfectly crystal clear, but I think he's done a really good job of getting them to this really sweet spot of clarity without introducing digital artifacting. So he's not trying to alter the sound, but just recover as much of the sound that's still on the discs. I hope that answers the question.
It answered it for me, I guess. So the next question is from Ruth, and Ruth asks, what was Colombia's goal in creating records with Armenian songs and American songs? She suggests, was it to help newcomers learn English and U.S. culture? And as a follow-up question, she asks, how did these recordings change post-genocide?
Well, the first part, I think Colombia, one major aspect was the commerce, the business of it. They saw there was a lot of immigrants in America. You know, the immigrant class was growing, and they started providing music for them. I think, in one hand, you can have a non-Armenian that's interested in music in general who wants to pick up, one of these tunes, and they have one side that's a non-Armenian song that's a little bit more accessible for them. I'm not fully sure of the details of why the decision was made, but I know with ethnic records they didn't produce too many at one time. Maybe it was a few hundred at a time. So those details, I don't know. I don't have the best answer for it. So yes, I'm not sure of what the exact answer to that is. Also, we haven't been able to find any connections of why these Tashjian brothers actually recorded, and I think that would shed some light. Was it, and one theory I have, that both times it was for fundraising efforts, relief efforts. So was it an agreement that Mardiros had with Colombia to just go ahead and press these? I'm not sure, but it was a really high number of records. And it was only with Mardiros's initial 6 that it was coupled with American songs. So it might have been they weren't sure how well they would sell. The second part of the question, how does it change after the genocide? It continues. It continues. A lot of the songs are recorded. There's more songs that are introduced. Outside of the Tosh John recordings and Karekin Proodian's recording, everything that I played today was post-genocide. So there was a concerted effort to get these artists to record. And they also had their own careers, Torcom especially. I hope that.
Alrighty. Thank you. I have a question for Martin regarding the Zabel recording you played for us.
Yes.
He's wondering who did the quartet arrangement for that piece, as Komitas didn't write for strings?
That's still information we're trying to figure out and assemble. There were a few arrangers and composers in America, but we've yet to find any direct contact with the recordings of who was behind, as Martin says, who was behind the orchestration. I'm confident we'll be able to find that information with just a little bit more research, but at this point, we're not sure. We're not sure who the musicians in the room were. We're just not sure. I mean, it could be as Zabel with her interaction with Gomidas. It could be that it was something Zabel herself composed, the music for it, and had the musicians play according to what she knew. So unfortunately, I don't have a clear answer for that one.
Alrighty. All right, I have two more questions. The first is from Carla. Did the Victor label have a wider audience than Columbia?
That's a good question. I want to assume that Columbia may have, but I'm not sure what the answer to that question is. I'd rather not guess, but I mean, if I were to guess, I would think Columbia would have had a wider outreach, but I'm not sure.
Not sure is an answer. That's okay. And then this one last question we have from Joseph. The question is, do you have any information, and I think I'm saying this correctly, on the Pharos, Pharos label? Was it perhaps an Armenian-owned label?
Yes. And Pharos pops up in the mid 1920s. So in 1923, there was a number of Armenian record labels that popped up: Parsegyan, Sohag, Margosyan, and by mid to later in the decade, the Pharos record company ends up buying a number of these Armenian record labels out and essentially reissues a lot of the music, and also has their a whole new roster of recordings and artists like Achilles Poulos, Edward Bogosian, and they put out a lot of music from the mid to late 20s.
Wonderful. All right, thank you so much, Harout. You were amazing. I will take the spotlight off of you here. You're in the clear now. Now it's my big head on the screen. So thank you so much, everybody. I think I can speak for everybody when I say thank you to Harout for this wonderful presentation. We're all a little more cultured because of it. And I want to thank all of you for joining us. We had an amazing turnout tonight, and this being a pilot for our first Zoom webinar. So thank you all for making it so successful. And I really enjoyed myself this evening, and I have to say a special thank you, of course, to Jesse Keenis Collins for all of his work he's done for Sound Archive and being very instrumental in Harout being able to put this presentation together. And of course, to the visual support from Project Save Armenian Photograph Archives. Thank you to all of you for all the beautiful images you provided. It really helps bring the story alive. But I hope you all enjoyed this as much as I did. And if you all did, we ask that you all become members of the Armenian Museum of America. It helps support projects like this, projects like Sound Archive on our website, and so many more virtual and hopefully someday in-person programs and resources. So if you are interested in becoming a member, you can do so online at armenianmuseum.org/membership, or you are welcome to call my colleague at the museum at 617-926-2562, extension 104. Again, thank you all. This has been recorded, so we will upload this onto YouTube so you can watch this over and over again and catch some of those songs that unfortunately a few of us missed at the beginning. But otherwise, I hope everybody has a great afternoon or evening, depending where you're located right now. And let's all give a big round of applause to Harout for this wonderful presentation. Everybody, without further ado, as I said, good night and good afternoon.